Midnight had a way of pressing its weight against the widowed rancher's chest, especially on nights like this, when the wind slid low across the plains and whispered through the bare cottonwoods, like voices that had lost their bodies. Elias Crow sat alone at his rough-hewn table, the lantern beside him burning low, its flame flickering as if even the light were tired of standing. Watch over an empty house. 5 years had passed since death had taken his wife. Yet the silence she left behind still felt fresh, still sharp enough to cut. Outside, the moon hung thin and pale, a dull blade in the sky, and the ranch slept under its cold gaze. Barn, corral, and fields stretching into darkness that felt endless. Elias had learned to live with loneliness, the way a man learns to live with an old wound. Not healed, just endured. He rose from the table, meaning to douse the lantern and surrender to another restless night. When the sound came, a knock, soft, hesitant, almost lost to the wind. He froze, listening, heart thudding like hooves on dry earth. No one knocked at midnight unless trouble had driven them there. The knock came again, small knuckles against wood, carrying a tremor that reached deeper than sound. Elias crossed the room and opened the door, and there she stood, a little girl no more than 5 or 6, her hair tangled by the wind, her thin coat pulled tight around a trembling body. Her cheeks were streaked with tears and dust, her eyes wide with fear too old for someone so young. "Mister," she whispered, voice barely louder than the snowflakes beginning to fall. "Mama needs help." In that moment, something long buried in Elias's chest stirred, a memory of caring for someone else, of being needed. He knelt so his eyes met hers, the lantern's glow spilling across her face, and asked her name. "Clara," she said, swallowing hard. "Mama can't get up." He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He lifted the lantern higher, its light pushing back the darkness, and told her she'd done the right thing. As he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, the cold seemed to bite deeper, as if the night itself resented what was about to happen. They walked, the lantern swinging between them, Clara's small hand gripping his finger like a lifeline. Each step carried them farther from Elias's quiet isolation and closer to something uncertain and urgent. The ranch faded behind them, replaced by the narrow trail Clara had followed alone, guided only by fear and love. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on him, heavy but strangely welcome. Somewhere ahead, a woman lay helpless, and a child had trusted him with everything she had left. If you've ever felt the pull of a story where one small act changes everything, stay with this moment. Because what begins with a midnight knock often becomes a light that refuses to go out. And if stories like this, stories of courage, quiet heroism, and unexpected bonds, speak to you, this is the kind of journey our channel exists to tell. So remember to subscribe and walk these paths with us. As the wind rose and the lantern flame danced, Elias realized that lighting one lantern was not enough. When they reached a bend in the trail and the darkness thickened, he stopped, struck a match, and lit another lantern he'd brought along, then another from a small cache he kept along the fence line, setting them alight one by one. The soft glow spread like hope itself, fragile but persistent, pushing back the night. Clara looked up at him in wonder, as if he were summoning stars to the ground. Elias didn't feel like a savior. He felt like a man finally answering a call he'd ignored for too long. With every lantern lit, the past loosened its grip, and the future, uncertain, dangerous, but alive, began to take shape. Ahead, somewhere beyond the reach of fear, a mother waited, and the night held its breath. The trail narrowed as Elias and Clara moved farther from the safety of the ranch, the lanterns behind them forming a fragile chain of light that trembled in the wind like memories refusing to fade. And with every step, Elias felt the old ache of his past mixing with the urgency of the present, because the land they crossed was unforgiving. Even in daylight and at night it seemed almost alive, full of hidden dips, frozen mud, and shadows that shifted when no wind touched them. While Clara stumbled once and Elias lifted her without a word, settling her against his chest as though he had done it all his life, her small heartbeat fluttering like a frightened bird against him, and she whispered directions between shallow breaths, telling him where the creek bent, where the fence was broken, where Mama had fallen earlier that evening when the pain grew too strong. And as she spoke, Elias realized how long this child must have been alone before she ever reached his door, how fear had sharpened her courage and pushed her through the dark, and the thought stirred something fierce in him, something protective, that had lain dormant since the night his wife died in childbirth. A night filled with lanterns, too. Lanterns that had burned until morning and still not been enough. And now here he was again, walking by lantern light toward another woman in danger, another fragile line between life and loss. And the night seemed to sense it, the wind picking up, snow falling thicker, each flake catching the light before vanishing. While Elias adjusted his grip and told Clara softly that she was brave, braver than most grown men he knew, and she shook her head and said she was just scared for Mama. And that simple truth struck him harder than any sermon, because love, he realized, was often just fear shaped into motion, fear that refused to sit still. And as they crossed the frozen creek, the ice groaned beneath their boots. Clara clutched his shirt tighter, and Elias slowed his steps, spreading his weight carefully, the lantern's reflection trembling on the dark water below, and for a moment the world seemed balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move away from disaster, but they made it across. And when they reached the small homestead hidden among scrub trees, Elias saw the door hanging crooked, a sign of poverty and struggle that told him everything he needed to know. And inside, by the dim glow of a dying candle, lay Clara's mother, her face pale, her breath shallow, pain etched deep into her features, and Elias knelt beside her, his voice calm despite the storm in his chest, promising help, promising warmth, promising that the night would not take her if he could help it. And as he lit every lantern in that small house, filling it with trembling gold light, something changed in the air, as though hope itself had been given permission to breathe again. And Clara watched with wide eyes as darkness retreated from the corners. And Elias worked with steady hands, rapping, lifting, planning the long return to the ranch where warmth and shelter waited, knowing the journey back would be harder, slower, more dangerous, but also knowing that turning away was no longer an option, because some knocks echo long after the door is opened, and some nights choose you whether you are ready or not. And if this story has pulled you in, if you feel the quiet strength of ordinary people rising in moments like this, remember that subscribing to this channel means choosing to hear more. Stories where light is carried into dark places, one lantern at a time, because the night is long, but no one has to walk it alone. The return journey began under a sky that seemed to press lower with every step, the snow thickening until the lantern light looked like it was swimming through milk, and Elias felt the full weight of what he had taken upon himself settle into his bones as he carried Clara's mother wrapped in blankets, her breath shallow but steady enough to keep hope alive, while Clara walked close at his side, her small fingers brushing his coat as if afraid he might vanish like a dream, and the land that had seemed merely dark before now felt hostile, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Yet Elias moved with the stubborn determination of a man who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. And as they passed each lantern he had lit earlier, he stopped to brighten the flame, to shield it from the wind, understanding now that the lanterns were more than tools, they were promises, markers that said someone had been here and someone would return. And Clara watched him with a seriousness far beyond her years, learning without being taught that light required tending, that it could not be left alone and expected to survive. And when her mother moaned softly, fear tightened around Elias's heart like a fist, memories flooding back of his own wife's labored breathing, the helplessness of waiting while life hung in balance. And for a moment he nearly faltered, nearly let grief steal his strength. But then Clara looked up at him and asked in a trembling voice if Mama would be okay. And Elias answered not with certainty but with resolve, telling her that they were not done fighting yet, that the night had not won, and those words seemed to give her mother strength too, because her breathing steadied, and the wind, relentless until then, eased as if listening, and step by step they moved forward, the ranch slowly emerging from the darkness, like a ship sighted from a storm-tossed sea. And when they finally reached the porch, Elias set Clara's mother down gently and hurried to build the fire, lighting every lantern he owned until the ranch glowed like a beacon against the snow, a sight that would have seemed wasteful to anyone else but felt necessary to him. Because this was not just about seeing, it was about defying the dark. And as warmth returned to the woman's face and color crept back into her cheeks, Elias felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not grief this time, but something like purpose. And Clara sat beside her mother holding her hand, whispering words Elias couldn't hear but understood anyway. And he stepped back for a moment, watching them, realizing that the knock at midnight had not just brought need to his door, it had brought meaning. a reason to keep the lanterns burning. And if this moment speaks to you, if you believe that stories of ordinary people choosing to care still matter, then this channel is for you. And subscribing is your way of saying that light, even fragile light, is worth protecting and passing on, because every view, every subscription, is another lantern lit against the dark. And as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Elias knew the night was not yet over, but he also knew he would not face it alone. Morning did not come all at once, but in hesitant shades of gray, the storm easing its grip, inch by inch, as if reluctant to release what it had claimed during the night. And Elias sat by the fire long after exhaustion should have taken him, watching the slow rise and fall of Clara's mother's chest, listening to the small sounds of life returning to a house that had known too much silence. And when dawn finally slipped through the frost-rimmed window, it revealed a truth Elias had not yet allowed himself to name, that the night had changed him as surely as it had saved them, because when Clara woke and smiled at him with a gratitude too big for words, he felt something mend inside his chest that grief had kept broken for years, and her mother, weak but alive, reached for his hand and whispered thanks that carried the weight of a lifetime, and he answered simply that it was what anyone should do, though he knew not everyone would have answered that knock, not everyone would have lit every lantern. And as the day warmed the snow into soft glittering fields, neighbors arrived, drawn by the glow they had seen from miles away, bringing supplies, medicine, and quiet respect. And Elias watched as community formed around an act that had begun with fear and a child's courage. And he understood then that light spreads in ways you cannot plan, that one choice ripples outward until it touches lives you will never fully know. And when Clara asked if she could stay a while, if she could help feed the chickens and learn the names of the stars, Elias pointed out the night before, he found himself saying yes without hesitation, because loneliness had taught him what absence felt like. And this felt like presence, like something worth protecting. And as days passed and Clara's mother grew stronger, laughter returned to the ranch, tentative at first, then real, and the lanterns, Elias once lit only for himself, now burned each evening as symbols of welcome. And if you've stayed through this story, if you've felt the quiet power of compassion and the strength found in choosing to care, then this channel was made for you, because subscribing is more than a click. It's a way of saying these stories matter, that hope told softly can still change hearts. And as the sun set on a ranch no longer defined by loss, Elias stood on the porch with Clara beside him, lighting the lanterns one by one, not because the dark demanded it, but because light, once shared, becomes a habit. And the night, for all its vastness, no longer felt so endless.